Lewis Hamilton's Qatar disaster has taken a dramatic turn after the FIA uncovered new internal evidence about the behavior of his Ferrari during qualifying, and the truth is far more severe than anyone expected. Right after Hamilton qualified 18th with one of the slowest laps of his season, the FIA and Ferrari engineers compared structural data from the SF25 and discovered a hidden mechanical problem that explains why Hamilton kept shouting that the car was impossible to drive. This shocking new evidence not only exposes why Hamilton was sliding everywhere in the final sector, but also reveals how badly Ferrari's decision to stop developing the car earlier this year has destroyed their season. Before we break down everything the FIA has uncovered, make sure you subscribe right now, because the situation developing inside Ferrari is bigger than anyone expected. The Qatar qualifying session confirmed one of the darkest moments of Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari era, as he finished 18th eliminated in Q1 with a lap time of 1 minute 20 seconds and 907 thousandths. His teammate Charles Leclerc reached Q3, but even he could only finish 10th, more than a full second behind Oscar Piastri's pole. This showed immediately that Ferrari's problem is structural and not a matter of driver performance. The SF25 simply lacked the grip and balance required for the circuit's heavy load profile. From the opening laps, Hamilton reported an alarming loss of rear stability, especially through Qatar's medium speed corners. He described a violent snap in the final sector where the rear axle suddenly let go without warning. This type of instability makes every turn a risk because the driver cannot predict how the car will react. During the debrief, the FIA and Ferrari engineers confirmed the issue by identifying a mechanical imbalance between the floor and the rear suspension, which caused unpredictable drops in aerodynamic load. This confirmed why Hamilton's feedback was so severe. Ferrari's tire performance compounded the problem. The SF25 failed to bring the tires into the proper temperature window, meaning Hamilton entered the first corners with no bite and no confidence. He lost nearly half a second in the opening 4 turns alone compared to cars with better tire activation. While McLaren and Mercedes switched on the tires, instantly Ferrari spent the whole lap waiting for grip that never arrived. The result was a complete collapse of competitiveness in the very sector where Hamilton typically excels. Adding to the challenge, Hamilton chose a higher downforce configuration in an attempt to stabilize the rear. Although this theoretically increases grip, the setup only created additional drag without solving the mechanical problem underneath. He became slower on the straights while still unstable through the corners, leaving him with a car that was compromised in every part of the circuit. This left Hamilton in a position where he could not attack and could not defend, making improvement impossible. Leclerc's result highlighted the depth of Ferrari's crisis. Even though he reached Q3, he finished last among the final 10 behind drivers from the midfield, such as Pierre Gasly and Fernando Alonso. The 0.3 he gained over Hamilton in Q1 came from being slightly more comfortable with a loose rear, but even his pace was far behind the leaders. Ferrari's early decision to abandon development of the SF25 in April has left the team exposed while their rivals continue to evolve. Qatar provided the clearest demonstration of that strategic mistake. Hamilton's radio messages captured his psychological state during the session. Instead of anger, he showed resignation. He told his engineer the car would not go any faster and insisted that he had reached its physical limit. A second internal message not aired on television was even more concerning, as Hamilton told his engineer that the car was dangerous in the fast corners due to a complete lack of grip. This level of driver feedback usually forces the FIA to examine safety-related parameters, and it did in this case. During the technical review, the governing body agreed that Hamilton's complaints matched the data abnormalities found in the rear of the car. The FIA's evidence review led to one unavoidable conclusion. Ferrari's structural flaw, combined with their early development shutdown, has produced a car that is fundamentally incapable of competing at the front. For Hamilton, the Qatar weekend now becomes a survival mission. He will start near the back of the grid with tire offsets available, but with a car that overheats in traffic and loses grip instantly in the fast corners. Unless the race becomes chaotic with multiple safety cars, a points finish looks nearly impossible. Hamilton remains the same world-class driver, but the SF25 has collapsed underneath him, leaving him to fight only for data and dignity in the final races of the season. The fundamental problem for Lewis Hamilton in Qatar qualifying was that the SF25 simply did not enter the performance window required for a circuit that demands stability, traction, and confidence at extremely high speeds. From the moment Hamilton began his run, He was fighting a car that reacted unpredictably to every steering input. The rear axle felt loose, as if the car was pivoting around a point he could not control. When Hamilton loses reference through medium-speed corners, the consequences multiply instantly. The lap becomes reactive rather than proactive, and the data confirmed that he could not build the momentum needed to challenge even midfield competitors. A second problem emerged from the car's inability to generate tire temperature in the first sector. Hamilton's tires remained outside the optimal range well into the opening corners, which eliminated the mechanical grip necessary to lean on the front end. As he turned into the initial sequence, the car understeered early, and then suddenly transitioned into oversteer as the rear lost stability. This imbalance made the SF25 unpredictable and stripped Hamilton of the confidence required to attack the lap. Meanwhile, the cars around him had already activated their tires and were generating grip immediately. Ferrari's disadvantage in this area became catastrophic in Qatar. The third issue was structural. The FIA and Ferrari identified a mechanical imbalance between the floor and the rear suspension, which caused irregular drops in aerodynamic load. When a car loses rear load unexpectedly, the driver receives no warning and must react instantly. Hamilton mentioned this repeatedly on the radio, describing violent snaps in final sector where the rear felt disconnected from the rest of the chassis. The aerodynamic data confirmed these sensations. Sudden variations in load remove stability during high-speed transitions and force the driver to drive within a margin far larger than what is needed to be competitive. The fourth problem came from the decision to run a higher downforce configuration. Hamilton selected this in an attempt to stabilize the rear because the car felt too loose earlier in the session. Unfortunately, the setup did not fix the underlying mechanical imbalance. Instead, it created additional drag, which slowed him significantly on the straights while preserving the instability in the medium speed corners. Ferrari effectively produced a car that was compromised in every part of the lap. The downforce increase did not deliver stability, and the drag penalty left him unable to recover the time lost earlier in the circuit. The fifth problem became visible when comparing Hamilton's performance to that of Charles Leclerc. Although Leclerc advanced to Q3, he still finished 10th, more than a full second away from Oscar Piastri's pole. This demonstrated that the Ferrari was structurally uncompetitive on the Qatar layout regardless of who was driving. The 0.3 Leclerc found over Hamilton in Q1 came from a slightly more stable rear balance, but even that was insufficient to bring Ferrari into contention. The difference between both drivers showed that Hamilton was not underperforming. Instead, he was dealing with a car significantly outside the necessary operating range. The sixth problem sits at the heart of Ferrari's strategic error earlier in the season. The team halted development of the SF25 before the summer in order to shift resources toward next year. At the time, Ferrari believed they had enough performance to maintain competitiveness. Qatar exposed the full cost of that decision. The teams around them have continued evolving their cars, while Ferrari has remained static. As a result, the SF25 now behaves like a machine from a different phase of the season and fails to match circuits with demanding aerodynamic profiles such as Qatar. Hamilton is suffering the consequences of a strategic choice he did not make. The final problem is psychological. Hamilton's radio messages reflected a driver who knew that the car had reached its limit. He was calm but defeated as he told his engineer that he could not go faster no matter what changes they attempted. At one point, he insisted that the car was dangerous through fast corners. That sort of message usually triggers a review from the FIA, and in this case, the governing body agreed that the behavior of the SF25 matched Hamilton's warnings. When a 7-time world champion expresses concern about stability, and the data confirms those concerns, the problem is no longer about pace. It becomes a question of safety and trust, and in Qatar, Hamilton had neither. Ferrari's engineering group entered the Qatar debrief carrying a level of pressure that has been rare even for a team accustomed to global scrutiny. The data revealed that Hamilton's SF25 was operating outside its intended mechanical window from the very beginning of the session. Engineers could see irregularities in the ride behavior that explained the sudden snaps Hamilton reported through the final sector. These readings forced the team to run immediate structural checks because when a car loses rear load in a circuit dominated by high-speed transitions, the issue becomes both a performance problem and a safety concern. The first critical engineering challenge involved analyzing how the floor interacted with the rear suspension under peak lateral load. The data indicated that the car was producing inconsistent aerodynamic pressure in the medium speed corners, which created rapid load drops. When the rear is not supported by stable aerodynamic flow, the suspension must absorb the imbalance. However, the SF25 was unable to do so cleanly, creating a chain reaction that destabilized the chassis further. Engineers now had to determine whether this behavior came from wear, temperature variation, or an internal stiffness mismatch. A second layer of pressure came from the tire behavior. Ferrari's inability to bring the tires into the optimal temperature range was not only a driver comfort issue, but a technical limitation. When tires run cold, the compound does not generate the grip necessary to stabilize the car mechanically. This forces the aerodynamic platform to carry more of a load, and if that platform is already unstable, the problems multiply. Engineers must now redesign Hamilton's tire preparation sequence for the race because the single lap window was clearly outside the working range needed for proper front and rear balance. Another major pressure point came from Hamilton's choice to use a higher downforce package. The engineers supported the attempt because the car felt nervous in earlier runs, but the data later showed that increasing downforce did not cure the underlying mechanical imbalance. Instead, the drag penalty slowed him significantly on the straights and masked the deeper issue temporarily. The engineering team must now reassess whether the car's mechanical structure can support any aerodynamic adjustment or whether those adjustments risk worsening the instability. This becomes a delicate balance that requires modeling and caution. Comparisons with Leclerc added a different level of engineering pressure. Leclerc's car displayed a slightly more stable balance, which allowed him to advance from Q1 and reach Q3. However, the gap between both drivers did not imply that Hamilton underperformed. The telemetry showed that Leclerc's SF25 also suffered instability, but to a lesser degree. Engineers now face the challenge of identifying why two cars with identical specifications behave differently and whether the issue lies in setup sensitivity, chassis variation, or a divergence in tire interaction. In high-precision environments like Qatar, even microscopic differences must be traced and corrected. The broader structural pressure came from Ferrari's earlier strategic decision to freeze development of the SF25. As rivals added updates throughout the season, Ferrari's package stagnated, which left the engineering team with fewer tools to compensate for fundamental weaknesses. In Qatar, this created a situation where engineers were attempting to solve aerodynamic and mechanical problems using a car that no longer evolves. Without new parts or expanded upgrade paths, engineers must rely solely on setup interpretation, tire management, and load balancing. This limits what they can fix and amplifies every issue Hamilton suffered.